In John chapter 18, Jesus has been arrested, and most of his disciples, when you take the parallel accounts, have been frightened off by the great crowd of men who had come to arrest Jesus. But the Bible tells us in John 18, in verse 15 and following, that Peter and another disciple, unnamed, but obviously it is John himself, do follow Jesus. Peter is standing outside the gate of where they have taken Jesus into the place where he's going to be interrogated. John is known to the high priest, and he, through his knowledge, is able to allow Peter admission into at least the courtyard there. It is there that Peter is confronted, and by some translations say a damsel or a young girl, and said, "You're one of his disciples, aren't you?" And Peter says, "I am not," and he denies Jesus. Jesus had already foretold that that would happen. That didn't mean that it was inevitable, that Peter had no choice. Jesus simply had knowledge of what was going to happen based on the circumstances that Peter would face. It was very bold, very brave for Peter to be where he was, but it was also very frightening because he had been able to see what they had done to Jesus, and he knew what the outcome very well might be, and he could be next. And so he denied. A little later in John 18, in verse 25 through 27, he's asked again, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" And this time he's asked by a kinsman, a relative of Malchus, the one whose ear that Peter cut off. And again, he denies it. And he says, "I am not." And they begin to say something to him again, and he denies the third time. You have to look at the parallel accounts to realize that Peter then has this crushing realization of what he's done, that he leaves and he weeps bitterly. Later, Peter is restored, but at this moment, he finds himself in a frightening place, and he says, "I am not Jesus' disciple." Interestingly enough, earlier in the chapter, when they came to arrest Jesus, and they asked him, "Are you Jesus?" Jesus said, "I am he." Peter said about being a disciple of Jesus, "I am not." Do we find ourselves in the same predicament sometimes? Do we want to say, "I am not a disciple of Jesus"? Let's be like Jesus. And in those times when we have those confrontations, those possibilities, those temptations, let's say, "I am he, a disciple of Jesus."